The 2026 Georgia real estate market is quietly fracturing, and the suburbs you thought were guaranteed gold mines are officially crumbling under the weight of a massive hidden correction. While the mainstream media pushes the illusion of a booming Atlanta, forensic data reveals that 7 out of 10 homes are quietly selling for a loss, trapping thousands of recent buyers in negative equity. If you bought a home in the last 2 years or are planning to invest your hard-earned money in these formerly bulletproof zip codes, you are stepping onto a financial landmine. Stop scrolling because we are auditing the top 10 metro Atlanta suburbs where price cuts are the new normal, and what you learn in the next few minutes could save your entire net worth. The Georgia real estate story in 2026 is no longer a single, optimistic headline. It is a slow, devastating fracture line running directly underneath the suburbs that were treated like guaranteed winners just 24 months ago. For a long time, Metro Atlanta felt completely untouchable. People poured in from expensive coastal cities. Institutional investors aggressively chased the exact same zip codes. Builders rushed to pour concrete slabs before the permits were even dry. Sellers grew incredibly comfortable with the dangerous idea that their asking price was nothing more than an opening bid in a bidding war. But right now, the mood on the ground is fundamentally changing, and the institutional numbers are finally starting to admit it out loud. Prices are slightly down year over year. Homes are taking significantly longer to sell, and there are far fewer closings than last January. Local market updates point precisely to this severe price softening and rapidly rising inventory. Then there is the massive psychological shift. Recent data shows that roughly 70% of Metro Atlanta homes sold below their original asking price in 2025. That is not just a piece of real estate trivia. That is the market actively teaching buyers that waiting and negotiating actually works. This investigation is not about a fantasy housing crash that doomsayers predict every year. It is about identifying exactly where the cracks spread first, where massive price cuts become the new normal, where days on market stretch from weekends into financial quarters, and where sellers have to brutally compete against each other just to survive. The curiosity you should have right now isn't just about the fact that prices are falling, but why the psychology of the buyer has violently shifted. Why are out-of-state investors suddenly dumping their portfolios in cities that were supposed to be the next big boomtowns? Subscribe to Tax Hack Pro. We follow the money, the municipal data, and the real estate shifts that the mainstream industry refuses to explain in plain English. Hit that subscribe button now to understand exactly where the smart money is moving before your own equity evaporates. Now, let us count down the top 10 fracturing suburbs. Number 10, Woodstock. Woodstock was built on a suburban promise that felt absolutely bulletproof. It offered a highly polished, walkable downtown area and a commute down the interstate that people willingly tolerated because the sheer quality of the lifestyle felt worth the sacrifice. It featured neighborhoods that looked like the very definition of financial stability, something you could literally purchase and lock in. For years, Woodstock benefited from a highly powerful demographic mix. You had growing families wanting more space, buyers who were completely priced out of closer-in areas, and out-of-state newcomers actively choosing Cherokee County for the ultimate suburban upgrade. But the severe vulnerability for Woodstock in 2026 is that it is fundamentally a momentum suburb. It grew incredibly fast, and fast growth behaves exactly like a booster rocket on the way up, but it quickly becomes dead weight on the way down. When severe affordability issues squeeze the available buyer pool, the very first places to feel the pain are the ones powered almost entirely by emotion and urgency. During the boom, people bought in Woodstock because they feared being left behind. Investors bought because they simply assumed the next buyer would inevitably pay more. But when that urgency fades, Woodstock instantly turns into a grueling waiting game. Listings that would have vanished in a single weekend start sitting long enough to feel incredibly stale. Sellers who arrogantly expected multiple offers start hearing absolute silence. Buyers become highly selective because they suddenly have time on their side, and in real estate, time is the one thing that sellers hate the most. Woodstock also lives right in the middle-tier pressure zone. It is not the cheapest option for first-time buyers, but it is also not a prestige enclave where enormous generational wealth simply shrugs off a higher monthly mortgage payment. Middle-tier buyers are historically the most payment-sensitive buyers in the entire housing market, and in 2026, payment sensitivity completely controls the narrative. The crack here does not arrive like a dramatic collapse. It arrives like coastal erosion. A small price cut becomes two price cuts. Seller concessions quietly return to the closing table. Offers to cover closing costs get printed on the flyers again. And once one desperate seller finally blinks and takes a lowball offer, the entire neighborhood ceiling instantly resets. Then, the next listing on that street has to compete against that brand new, lower reality, not last year's optimistic memory. If you want to spot this early, watch for homes returning to the market after a failed contract. That is where the real story leaks out first before the price charts admit the decline. Number 9, Smyrna. Smyrna has always been brilliantly marketed as the perfect in-between location. It is close enough to Atlanta to feel highly connected, yet far enough out to feel legitimately suburban, positioned perfectly near job corridors that kept demand incredibly strong even when other fringe areas softened. For a very long time, Smyrna felt entirely protected because it offered something increasingly rare. It offered premium location access without the full, crushing city price tag. But in 2026, Smyrna is getting violently squeezed from both sides. On one side, you have buyers who would have eagerly targeted Smyrna during the frenzy. But now, because of elevated interest rates and spiked property taxes, the monthly payment feels like a second rent. Mortgage rates hovering around 6% still create a brutal world where buyers are extremely sensitive to minor payment changes. And national reporting has explicitly shown that demand can stall out overnight when a market stops delivering baseline affordability. On the other side, Smyrna faces the very real threat of substitutes. If Smyrna stops feeling like a value play, buyers immediately pivot. They look to other options in Cobb County, other pockets along the perimeter, or other neighborhoods where their heavy monthly payment stretches just a little bit further. That specific pivoting behavior is deadly because it turns Smyrna into a comparison market. In a comparison market, being even slightly overpriced is not a small mistake. It translates directly into months of sitting empty on the market. Smyrna's heavily mixed housing inventory actually accelerates that negative effect. Older homes that desperately need updates get punished first because buyers now strictly price in massive renovation costs. Townhome-heavy pockets reprice even faster because the comparables are painfully obvious, and identical units are forced to compete side by side. Newer homes that were bought near the absolute peak of the market become trapped listings because those sellers have almost zero equity room to cut the price without actually bringing cash to the closing table just to sell. This is exactly how deep cracks form without a major crash headline. A seller lists their home anchored to yesterday's blind optimism. The listing sits, then the first price cut happens, then another. Then buyers start treating below-list offers as standard operating procedure instead of aggressive lowballing. The exact moment you start seeing multiple highly similar listings in the exact same pocket, all adjusting their prices downward within a short window, Smyrna stops being a story about location and becomes a story about terms. And once a suburb becomes a term story, the buyer is in total control. Number 8, Kennesaw. Kennesaw grew into a highly recognizable brand. It became the ultimate symbol of attainable family life in metro Atlanta. It offered bigger homes, newer master-planned neighborhoods, and a steady, predictable pipeline of buyers who specifically wanted Cobb County access without paying the massive premium of the most elite school clusters. That reliable pipeline made Kennesaw feel incredibly safe for investors and families alike. But the reality of 2026 exposes a very different, uncomfortable truth. Kennesaw is highly sensitive because it sits directly on the affordability fault line. When interest rates rise or simply stay stubbornly elevated, the massive payment shock hits this specific tier first and hardest. Ultra-luxury buyers always have flexibility and cash. Entry-level buyers will relentlessly hunt for deep bargains, but the middle tier feels entirely trapped. Kennesaw has suddenly become too expensive to be considered cheap, yet too ordinary to be insulated from macroeconomic headwinds. Market snapshots clearly show longer selling timelines and far fewer sales in this specific area compared with last year, which perfectly fits the broader story of buyers moving slower and acting with extreme caution. Again, that caution shows up hard in suburbs like Kennesaw because the purchasing decision is almost entirely tied to strict family budgets and hard monthly payment ceilings. Kennesaw also suffers from having a massive amount of highly similar inventory. Similarity is a massive disadvantage in a slowing real estate market. When buyers can tour 5 nearly identical homes within a 10-minute drive, the overpriced one absolutely cannot hide. It instantly becomes the stale listing that everyone uses as leverage against the others. And once a listing feels stale, buyers instinctively assume something is structurally or legally wrong with it, even if the home is perfectly fine. Then the entire neighborhood gets dragged into the downward grind. Sellers are forced to reduce prices, not because they want to, but because time forces their hand. Appraisals start coming in tighter. Inspection requests come back looking like novels, minor repairs become major negotiation chips again, and the biggest financial pain lands squarely on recent buyers who have zero equity buffer. Those listings look perfectly normal on the surface, but the price history keeps changing because the seller mathematically cannot afford to be wrong for long. The crack in Kennesaw is not a dramatic cliff dive. It is the brutal return of friction. It means longer timelines, grueling negotiations, and deals that require heavy seller concessions just to survive the underwriting process. And once friction becomes the new normal, the market stops sprinting and starts dragging itself forward. Number 7, Cumming. Cumming is one of the absolute clearest examples in the entire state of how blindingly fast growth becomes a massive vulnerability. Forsyth County became an unstoppable magnet for families who wanted massive space, highly rated schools, and brand new communities. Demand surged to historic levels, and prices aggressively followed suit. For a while, Cumming felt like a financial rocket ship, but rockets inevitably run out of fuel, and in 2026, the biggest change is brutally simple. The buyer is no longer desperate. When the buyer is not desperate, the market is forced to justify itself with actual, verifiable value, rather than just riding momentum. Cumming's historic boom was powered by the collective belief that the North Atlanta suburbs would climb upward forever. That singular belief created incredibly stretched budgets and aggressive bidding. People willingly accepted grueling commutes because they assumed their home's equity growth would richly reward the sacrifice. Now buyers are carefully calculating the math instead of wildly chasing the dream, and that calculation makes Cumming deeply vulnerable because the monthly payment is the real price of the home. If you want to know how to leverage these market shifts to audit your own local real estate market and find the hidden discounts before anyone else, you must subscribe to Tax Hack Pro. We break down the exact negotiation tactics that institutional buyers use to acquire assets when the retail market freezes. Cumming is also full of newer neighborhoods that were bought during peak optimism. Newer homes usually look like financial safety, but in a rapidly shifting market, they can become massively exposed because the seller has absolutely no cushion. A seller who bought a brand new build at top dollar cannot cut their price by much without taking a devastating financial loss. So they try to hold the line. The listing sits. Sitting becomes the story of the neighborhood, and a listing that sits changes the entire psychology of the street. Buyers see it and think, why should I rush? Sellers see it and think, maybe I missed the absolute peak. The substitution effect hits incredibly hard here, too. If a buyer is willing to live that far out from the city center, they will simply compare Cumming with other fast-growth exurbs and widen their search radius until the monthly payment feels reasonable. That is how true value gets enforced, not through dramatic news headlines, but through buyers quietly and collectively refusing to overpay. You also have to carefully watch what happens when heavy incentives show up in nearby new construction builds. Massive corporate builders can easily lower the buyer's monthly payment with massive rate buydowns and closing cost credits while protecting the high headline price of the home. Number 6, Marietta. Marietta feels like an absolute safe word in metro Atlanta real estate. It boasts deeply established neighborhoods, strong demand anchors, and a sterling reputation that has held up remarkably well through multiple economic cycles. However, that pristine reputation is exactly why Marietta can crack in a way that truly surprises people, because historically safe markets are much slower to admit reality than they are to adjust all at once. The great myth of real estate is that highly stable suburbs are immune to macroeconomic shifts. They are not immune, they are simply slower to react. They resist the change first, and then they violently recalibrate. And in 2026, the recalibration pressure in Marietta is building to a boiling point because buyers are behaving completely differently. Data clearly shows Atlanta homes taking much longer to sell compared with last year and far fewer sales actually closing, which perfectly signals a market where buyers finally have time. Again, time is the ultimate weapon. When buyers have time, they meticulously compare every single listing and brutally punish anything that feels even slightly overpriced. Marietta also has a highly mixed inventory that creates a harsh dividing line in a slower market. Perfectly updated, turnkey homes still move relatively quickly, but normal, lived-in homes sit. Older homes that desperately need renovation get severely punished because buyers now accurately price in the harsh reality of repair costs. During the boom years, buyers completely ignored glaring flaws just to win the bid. In 2026, those exact same flaws are heavy negotiation currency. The crack in Marietta shows up primarily in mismatched expectations. Sellers, who are heavily anchored to peak comparables, list their homes like it is still a frenzy. Buyers who are heavily anchored to monthly payment reality respond with extreme caution. They ask for massive closing credits. They negotiate inspection items aggressively. They simply walk away when a stubborn seller refuses to budge because the buyer firmly believes another, better option will appear next week. And it almost always starts in the middle tier. Not the luxury estates, not the deep bargains, but the exact middle. That is where affordability pressure hits the hardest and where the buyer pool shrinks the fastest. Once that middle-tier buyer group steps back, the listings stack up, sellers are forced to cut prices just to stand out, and buyers begin expecting discounts as totally normal. Marietta does not need to become an undesirable place to live in order to reprice. It only needs buyers to stop believing that paying a massive premium is automatic. When the premium is no longer automatic, every single seller has to earn it, and earning it usually means handing over heavy financial concessions. Number 5, Roswell. Roswell essentially sells a feeling. It offers beautiful tree-lined streets, deep historic charm, and a profound sense of quiet wealth without shouting about it. It is the exact kind of suburb people imagine when they picture leaving the density of the city but keeping a highly cultured lifestyle. That is exactly why Roswell is cracking so hard in 2026. Because when a real estate market sells a feeling, it can easily become wildly overpriced relative to the actual underlying math. During the historic boom, buyers gladly paid for the dream. They paid a massive premium for the charm, the location, and the deep-seated belief that this specific lifestyle would never be available to them again. Fear of missing out created wildly inflated pricing, and inflated pricing is always what breaks first when the buyer pool becomes rational again. In 2026, Roswell faces a buyer who still genuinely loves the area, but is fully willing to walk away when the spreadsheet numbers do not make sense. That rational shift is already heavily supported by broader Atlanta indicators showing softer pricing and significantly slower transaction activity. When buyers slow down, they start noticing the expensive details they willfully ignored before. The age of the roof, the structural foundation questions, the heavily outdated kitchens, the awkward layout problems, and the massive cost of updating an older home to modern standards. Roswell has a massive inventory of older homes, and in a slower, more cautious market, older homes sell on a steep discount unless they are truly, flawlessly updated. So Roswell's crack forms directly along renovation lines. Beautifully updated homes still attract demand, but buyers negotiate much harder. Homes needing work sit empty, and those sellers are forced to cut. Those specific cuts create new, lower comparables that pull the entire market down quietly. Roswell also sits inside a highly competitive, wealthy ring. Buyers constantly compare Roswell with Alpharetta, Johns Creek, Milton, and Sandy Springs. If Roswell's pricing drifts too close to its most elite neighbors, buyers will either step up to the prestige suburb or step away entirely to a cheaper substitute. And stepping away is incredibly easy in a market with more selection and much longer timelines. The exact moment you see Roswell listings stacking multiple price changes in their history, you are watching the market actively remove emotion and replace it with cold, hard math. Number 4, Sandy Springs. Sandy Springs is a highly unique suburb with intense city energy. It features massive corporate corridors, highly dense pockets, high-end gated neighborhoods, luxury condo towers, sprawling townhomes, and classic single-family streets, all living within the exact same zip code. That incredible diversity made Sandy Springs feel like an incredibly safe bet for years, because the theory was that if one segment cooled down, another would stay hot and balance it out. In 2026, that exact diversity becomes a glaring weakness, because different housing types respond to macroeconomic shifts at vastly different speeds, and the fastest-moving segment almost always drags the rest of the market down with it. Condos and townhomes reprice incredibly quickly because the comparables are painfully obvious. When inventory stacks up in a specific building or a dense complex, price cuts become highly visible to everyone. Visibility instantly changes perception, and perception is the most powerful force in real estate. Sandy Springs also sits in the geographical squeeze zone, where buyers compare it directly to the city of Atlanta. When the city cools down, some buyers choose to move closer in if the price gap narrows. Others choose to move farther out if they want more space for the exact same monthly payment. That pushes Sandy Springs into a massive competition problem because it must constantly justify its massive premium on convenience, while buyers are suddenly obsessed with their total monthly cost. To stay updated on how these exact seller concessions are changing the tax implications of your real estate transactions, subscribe to Tax Hack Pro. We provide the forensic tax audits that ensure you don't lose your equity to hidden municipal fees and capital gains traps. Local news coverage has heavily described Atlanta inventory rising while prices soften, a toxic combination that gives buyers vastly more options and much more patience. Patience shows up as much slower decisions and significantly tougher negotiations. Buyers meticulously calculate the high condo fees. They calculate the rising HOA dues. They calculate their renovation budgets. They constantly ask whether the location premium is actually worth it compared with the nearby alternative. This is the exact crack pattern in Sandy Springs. Vastly more days on market, more listings that expire and relist, more aggressive price reductions, and more desperate sellers offering cash credits to keep deals alive. And because the market contains so many highly comparable properties, one major reduction can instantly reset the tone for an entire pocket very quickly. When Sandy Springs shifts, it rarely announces itself with a crash. It reveals itself in how sellers start explaining away their home's flaws instead of expecting multiple offers. And once sellers start explaining, buyers start negotiating much harder. Number 3, Johns Creek. Johns Creek is undeniably one of Georgia's most coveted and elite suburban brands. It offers a sterling reputation, top-tier schools, flawlessly polished neighborhoods, and the kind of civic identity that makes wealthy buyers feel incredibly safe spending big money. That is exactly why the cracks appearing here matter so much, because brand-priced markets carry a massive premium, and premiums are highly fragile when overall affordability tightens across the economy. The buyer who shops in Johns Creek is often stretching their budget to get there. Not always, but very often. They are explicitly paying for the name and what the name represents for their family. In a red-hot market, buyers do not question that premium, they just pay it. In a cooler market, buyers start demanding to know what they actually get for the price, and whether the premium still makes financial sense with a much heavier monthly payment. Atlanta area indicators show softer pricing and slower activity, which means that even strong, elite suburbs are living inside a rapidly changing metro system. And the absolute biggest change is that aggressive negotiation is becoming normal again. When 7 in 10 metro Atlanta homes sold below their original asking price, it taught buyers a powerful new habit: never pay the first number. That habit is absolutely deadly for premium suburbs because the premium depends entirely on buyer urgency. If buyers believe that waiting will produce a discount, they wait. They negotiate harder. They demand seller concessions. And the market begins grading listings very harshly. Perfect, turnkey homes still sell. Normal homes sit. Outdated homes get severely punished. The financial gap between flawless and average widens dramatically. Johns Creek also faces intense competition from its neighboring prestige suburbs. Alpharetta and Milton are constant, aggressive comparison points. That means Johns Creek has to defend its pricing not just against the broader market, but against its wealthy peers. If a buyer can stretch just a little bit more and move up, or save a little bit and move sideways, the Johns Creek premium gets heavily questioned. The crack here is not a total lack of demand. It is highly selective demand. The demand is still there, but it is incredibly careful, and careful demand does not support peak pricing. Number 2, Alpharetta. Over the last decade, Alpharetta became one of Metro Atlanta's absolute crown jewels. It offered tech adjacency, massive lifestyle branding, and the distinct feeling that you were buying into the absolute future of the metro area. During the boom, Alpharetta transitioned from a suburb into a symbol, and symbols tend to wildly overshoot their actual value because people stop buying houses and start buying narratives. In 2026, Alpharetta is cracking because 3 massive macroeconomic forces are colliding all at once. First is the sheer reality of affordability. Alpharetta price points demand massive income, huge cash savings, or massive rolled-over equity. Even highly well-qualified buyers are extremely sensitive to the monthly payment when rates remain sticky around 6%. And national reporting has clearly shown that pending sales can still severely weaken when the market does not deliver a balance of supply and affordability. Second is the collision of expectations. Sellers in Alpharetta got entirely used to the idea that the market would richly reward any listing, regardless of condition. Now, the market grades listings with extreme prejudice. Anything overpriced sits empty. Anything needing a new roof loses momentum. Anything with an obvious layout flaw gets negotiated down brutally. Third is raw competition. The massive growth in the area created more options, more new neighborhoods, and more comparable listings. And when buyers have options, they stop rushing. Atlanta's longer selling timelines absolutely support that shift in behavior. And once buyers slow down, Alpharetta's massive premium has to defend itself with actual value instead of blind confidence. The most deeply vulnerable segment of this market is the one bought at peak optimism. Homes purchased recently with minimal down payments and zero equity buffer. Those specific sellers cannot cut their price by much, but the market absolutely demands cuts to move the inventory. That is where the cracking becomes incredibly real, because the seller is financially trapped between what they owe the bank and what the 2026 buyer is actually willing to pay. Alpharetta's narrative used to be completely unstoppable. In 2026, the story becomes highly measurable. Days on market, price reduction frequency, and seller concessions creeping back into the closing documents. And once the buyer truly believes a deal is possible here, the entire psychology shifts, because a symbol suburb losing its urgency changes the mood across the entire north side of Atlanta. Number 1, Milton. Milton is the suburb that people simply assume is completely untouchable. It offers absolute prestige, massive multi-acre lots, deeply exclusive gated communities, sprawling newer estates, and an image of generational wealth that feels entirely insulated from normal economic pressure. That is exactly why Milton is the most shocking place to see the cracks forming. But these cracks matter more than anywhere else, because Milton sits at the absolute top of the pyramid. And when the top of the market shifts, everything underneath it feels the tremors. If you want to protect your wealth, you need the right data. Subscribe to Tax Hack Pro and turn on notifications to stay ahead of the changing market. Let us know in the comments which of these suburbs surprised you the most. We will see you in the next financial audit.